Now I'm going to give this part of the interview over to my second assistant today, Susan, who's going to ask a question in regards to a letter that she stumbled across in Malabar here in New South Wales. It's quite upsetting, so viewer discretion is advised.
Co-partner.
Hold it down, please.
All right. Craig, I came across a letter. Oh, sorry. Craig, I came across this letter. And it's someone in clear mental anguish. They've talked about pretty much in this letter of taking their life, and that this virus has sent their thinking, their mental health off the Richter, they've described. Freedom's winning, as you say, there's arguments for that, but how did we get in such a mess that someone can write this letter, and how are we going to recover once we even get past this? But
how we got into such a mess, you're right, and it's tragic. I've heard of several people tragically committing suicide during this period. I know many people, these marches, how important they've been to people's mental health, to be able to come here with thousands and know that thousands of other people are fighting for what they believe. But look, how did we get into this mess? We allowed a concentration of power. We allowed power to be concentrated in too few, a small number of hands. Where we've seen this in the US and Australia. We've seen the power of big pharma. Too much power concentrated in one hand. We've seen these medical bureaucrats having too much power. We've given up on what the fundamental principles that we believe in. Freedom of speech has been trashed and destroyed. Where we should have been encouraging alternate opinions and alternate voices, that's what we should have had. People are very passionate, and that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I encourage people to get out there, express and be passionate about these causes, because we're talking about the future of our country, the future of our kids.
so, Craig, that's exactly why we're here, the future of our country and the future of our kids. What is the core issue? My background is journalism. I've got investigative journalism as my master's. And it doesn't just take you to have an investigative background to figure out that these facts and statistics are telling everyone the truth. 38th reason cause of death in the country COVID is, and we've got this response. It's been described as a Soviet-style response.
Right, yeah.
I would like to ask you, do you believe that this is COVID response is out of a communist playbook with a fascist outcome?
Yeah,
how is that allowed in a free country?
Well, that's a good point, because we've given up the basic fundamentals of freedoms. That's what we've done. Our politicians have walked away thinking they can get some short-term political advantage by so-called keeping us safe, which goes back to the good old French Revolution, the Committee for Public Safety that had nothing to do with public safety. Governments throughout history have used the guise of public safety to imply, their dictatorial powers. That's the reason. That's the reason it's there. But look, I think the real problem, if you look at where everything's happened, where everything's gone wrong, and whenever a decision doesn't make sense, I think you follow the money. Follow the money is what makes sense. Everything has been tied back to trying to force these vaccination programs upon populations, which simply means for these big drug companies selling more of their product. If you look at it from a competition point of view, why have they suppressed early treatments of ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, these treatments that have been shown out around the world to be very successful? Because they were competition to the vaccines. So like in any business, you want to crush the competition. And that's what's happened. You've had the weight of big pharma, their money, their propaganda, being able to crush the competition, silence dissent, influence government, all for the billions and billions of dollars of profits that they've been able to make. Now, just to give you an example of how much money's been made in this. Moderna, the company Moderna, one of the vaccine manufacturers, January 2020, their market capitalisation was $7 billion. Last I checked, it was something around $140 billion. So they've increased their market cap, that's the value of the company for their shareholders, by $130 billion US dollars. Now that would have never happened if the truth had have been told. If the truth had have been told about things like ivermectin, if they hadn't distorted the truth about how many people were dying for COVID, if they hadn't hidden all the adverse events. So everything that I see goes back to anti-competitive competition, anti-competitive conduct by a few very big companies that have been allowed to get too big and dominate markets and hold politicians and governments hostage.
What did you know all this before you came on this side? And what did you do about it? And why are you doing something about it now?
Yeah, okay.
Because that's what's holding people back. People aren't trusting words from politicians, the media, or the main voices. They've lost trust. There's division. What are you going to do about it?
Look,
you need to probably
yeah,
talk.
sure. Look, it's right that people should be distrustful of politicians. Absolutely. Yeah, I've been in Canberra for 10 years. I can tell you, you should be very distrustful of politicians, right? You should question and not and listen. Question them on every single thing they say. But look, I think I stood up not only this year but last year. I was the only member of Parliament questioning the lockdowns. I was the only member of Parliament questioning the TGA, arguing that there were alternate policies. I was suspended from Facebook. I was black banned from all the major TV networks, and even black banned from on Sky News. Your name gets vilified, left, right and centre. And I had two options. I could just shut up and go along with the flow and, sort of like look for a cosy career post-politics. Or I could go with my conscience, and my conscience was like, I'm not going to shut up. So I decided. I walked away from the Liberal Party. I walked away. I took quite a substantial. I took quite a substantial. I'm not complaining as a member of Parliament, well paid, but I took a substantial pay cut walking away from the government. I gave up a lot of opportunities that would have come to me post politics because I thought the government was doing the wrong thing, and I wasn't going to be quiet about it. And I think I've shown since then that I put my values on the table, I wear my heart on my sleeve on the policies that I do. And I just hope that people will listen and see what I've said, to ignore the misinformation campaigns that are going around. On this side, I want to call them the freedom parties, all the freedom parties, and there's many of them. We need to stay united. We need to preference each other. That's the way we're going to win this and try and get our country back.
So these are your strategies. What are some clear strategies that the minor parties are you going to get together? Like truly,
look,
like really?
Okay, firstly, in this, I want diversity of opinion and diversity of voices. You don't want that. I think the position that one party has the true way and the only way. I want to hear what the guys from the Liberal Democrats are arguing. Right? I might not agree with everything they say. I might agree with a lot they say. I might pick up a small point of what they say and fine-tune my point of view. I want to hear from the people from the Medical Options Party. I want to hear as many divergent voices as we can on the freedom side of politics. I know there's this idea that we all should get together and speak with one voice, but I think there's an advantage of us all speaking individually, and the time we speak with the one voice is on election day, where we all make sure we educate people that support us how the preference system works, and we all preference each other, and I think that's the best way to maximise our vote.
So confirmed that you will preference each other?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I'll tell you now, we will put Liberal, Labor and the Greens last. First, we'll do even better than that. In the Senate, you only have to allocate 6 preferences. We will not be allocating any preferences to Liberal, Labor or Greens in the Senate. They will all go to other minor parties. And in the House of Reps, you have to put one major party ahead of the other, because you have to number every square. And my recommendation here to people, learn how you do it, find out who your sitting member is. If your sitting member is a Liberal member, put them last. If it's a Labor member, put them last. So in some elections you'll put Liberal last, some elections you'll put Labor last. That's the voting system. You have to do one above the other. And that's my recommendation. We want to make sure that all the minor parties are exchanging preferences with each other ahead of Labor, Liberal and the Greens.
Well, I think what we all need to know, there's a lot of division. What people are saying, all these things about Freemasonry, all those things. What is the real major threat that we're all facing in this camp? Like,
well, the major threat we have is division itself. Right?
And what do we do about it? How do you lead? How do you lead with that?
Firstly, I will not criticise publicly any of the other minor freedom parties. Right? Okay. I might respond to a few things they say to correct some things I say I think are incorrect. But I don't criticise these people. These people all have good hearts and are all on the right. They're on the right side of history. We don't want to emphasise the things like people say, you held your hands in a certain position. They're giving us like this is nonsense. This is ridiculous. It honestly is. But look, I understand why people get suspicious because of what's happened.
There's a lot of.
And people should be suspicious. I hope people get out and everything that I say, question it. Yeah. Question it. When I say something like the data shows that from the UK that you are more likely to get COVID, infected with COVID, if you've been injected twice than if you've been unvaccinated, I don't want people to take my word for it. I want them to go to the actual raw data themselves and check it for themselves. That's what I want people.
So where's the place for someone that's just all of a sudden realising that their government's been lying to them? They're feeling lost from mainstream. They're feeling lost from their usual party. Where do they go? What's their strategy? Where do they go to find all these true figures?
Okay, look, firstly, I had a Facebook account where I used to put all this stuff up. Facebook banned me. They took my entire account down. Personal photos, personal trips that I'd made, family photos that I'd done, wiped it all. But just deleted it from history like something out of a 1984 novel. Destroyed it all.
When was that?
That was earlier this year. Sorry. That was earlier in 2021. That's almost 12 months ago.
So they're taking information from the people.
That's
these,
right.
These big techs.
So the place I can say where you can go. So I now have a Telegram account. So I post my things on Telegram, where I can post censorship free. Even on YouTube, I can't post censorship free. I've given speeches in the federal parliament, which go on the Hansard record, and I post it to YouTube, and YouTube delete it. So they're denying Australians access to being heard what is said in their federal parliament.
So grown adults, grown citizens who can make up their mind if they think something's true or not is.
So this is Google and YouTube.
Yep.
The biggest online platforms in the world are censoring what is said in the Australian federal parliament.
So they're withholding information under what guise? What is the reasons for it?
Well, they use this claim of medical misinformation, but it is not misinformation. They're the ones misleading people. Where we have qualified doctors around the world and peer-reviewed science that contradicts or shows up what these chief medical bureaucrats that we have here are saying, that should be an area of legitimate discussion and debate.
Balance.
But what's happened, you find, and I've spoken to many people, they said these medical bureaucrats that are running, when we've got these chief medical officers, they were the dregs of the medical school. I speak to some of the professors and they say, I know that person, they weren't good enough. All my best students went into the private sector to work and help people and save lives, and all the people that were no good in my medical class and medical school, they're all the ones that end up in government running the show and calling the shots.
Well, their head of stage in the UK isn't she a?
Right.
She's a.
Oh, look,
well-admitted
it's the same,
communist. She says she's a tanky.
It's the same all around the world, that these bureaucrats have been given too much power, which goes back to my point. It is the concentration of power that these bureaucrats should not have, and it's been the shutting down of free speech and free debate that has got us into this problem. And the media, the mainstream media, is very much to blame. Look, let me give you one example. We saw in Melbourne the police firing rubber bullets into the backs of people fleeing a protest in a public park. Women and kids are opening fire. Now, that is something I thought would have never seen in my country. Right? That should have been across the front page of every nation, yet none of the mainstream media covered it. They didn't show the pictures. They deliberately, intentionally censored police firing rubber bullets into the backs of protesters. That was censored by all the mainstream media. So Australians don't even know what's happening in their country. This is what you would expect. This is what you would expect in a totalitarian communist country, where the government would have such control of the media that they black out the protests so people can't see what's going on. This is happening in Australia in 2021 and 2022.
So who's directing this, Craig? Who's directing all this attack on democracy?
Again, I think if you go back and follow the money, it's the pharmaceutical companies that have been able to make so much money out of this, and of course they have the influence over the politicians.
How do they have the influence over? Do you have any?
Yeah, okay, let me give you an example. How they influence politicians. There's two ways. Firstly, if I was you watch in the years to come, all these government health ministers that we've got now, you watch them, they'll turn up be given jobs on the boards of these big pharmaceutical companies, where they'll pick up a couple of $100,000 a year for the rest of their life, sitting on a board for going for a few meetings, for doing the right thing, not on behalf of the people, but on behalf of the pharmaceutical company. You watch, they'll all end up...
Name names?
Well, look, just you watch every health minister in this country. That's my prediction. You watch in the years to come, they will all end up on boards of these big pharmaceutical companies or some cosy job in big pharma. You just watch. That's one way they get at the politics.
So conflict of interest.
Well, no,
Right.
it's post-politics employment, right? So what happens? So when you watch these, as I said, these health ministers, when they leave office and they leave politics, they'll end up in jobs with these big companies, earning multiple times the salaries that they got as politicians. That's one way that the big pharma can influence. So if I go out, like for example, I've been very aggressive in the recent committee inquiries attacking Facebook and Google, and YouTube and Twitter. Now, that means I'm never going to get a job with those guys afterwards. I've been out attacking companies like Merck and Pfizer, right? They're never going to give me a job. There's so many people that I will not be able to get a job with because of the stance I've taken. But because of these politicians that have given rewards to these companies and made these companies billions of dollars, right? The quid pro quo down the track, these companies will find nice, cosy jobs for them down the track. So that's one way they get to politics. The other way is through the lobbyists. You would find the factional lobbyists in both sides of politics get enormous amounts of money from the big pharma
Have
side.
we got any evidence of it?
Just have a look at who I have the contracts with. So every big pharmaceutical company would have a government relations people. Look who they're paying. Go back and through the data. Look who these people are paying for their government relations jobs. They're all tied into the factions of the parties. So the average person sitting on the back bench of the Liberal Party or the Labor Party is not going to speak out against these companies because he knows that will threaten their pre-selection.
This is corruption.
Well, so this is why the corruption comes about through the concentration of power, the undue concentration of power. And this is what if you go back, if you go back through your economic history, this is why at the turn of the 1900s, the Americans were so strong with what they called their antitrust laws at making sure no one big corporation could control too much of the market. That's why they broke up Standard Oil. Standard Oil was monopolising the production of oil in the USA. The US courts broke them up into 39 separate companies, not because so much for the economic concerns, but because the concerns of that so much power, what they could influence on the political sphere.
So what are you going to do about it? Say you get into power, how are you going to prevent that? How are you going to rip all that down? Are you going to, and were you promised to?
Yeah, sure, okay. One of the reasons, if you go back to my maiden speech in Parliament, one of the reasons I got into politics was because I thought our competition laws, what was our Trade Practices Act, which is now known as our Australian competition law, was broken. And I even talked about in the US how they need to reinvigorate their antitrust laws to make sure these giant companies don't get too big where they can intimidate, influence and control government. We need a complete change and I've argued that in my 10 years of politics to try and improve those competition laws. I must admit I haven't had any success. There was nothing more I'd love to get those laws fixed and changed. Every time we've changed those laws, they've increased the power of large corporations over small business. So one way in that aspect is to make sure that small businesses have greater opportunity in the marketplace and to make sure we get no one or two companies controlling the marketplace like we've seen in our grocery sector here in Australia.
Well, I suppose if people will vote for you, Craig, they need to know that you're going to actually stop this from happening again, because what's the point?
Well, if I didn't, I'd tell you to come and walk through these public parks again. I'm sure there'd be many people that want to teach me a lesson, but look now.
How are you going to fight this corruption if this is their post-promised little cushy job?
Okay. Well, as I said, the very first order of business that I would do, and the bill's before Parliament. I've already written the bill. I've sat down with legislators, and what I did, I took the vaccine, the ban on vaccine mandates that was in Florida that Governor Ron DeSantis had put in Florida. You see how well Florida's doing at the moment. It's all Governor DeSantis' work because he's one of the true leaders in the world that believes in freedom. So I took his legislation, I took it to the parliamentary draftsman and said, let's convert this to Australian Westminster parliamentary language. That was done. That bill sits before Parliament today. never voted on. So that's called the No Domestic Vaccine Passport Bill. That'd be the first order of business. We'd bring that on for a vote. That would end the mandates. It would end these tyrannical, it would take away the power from these tyrannical state premiers. That'd be the very first order of business. The second order of business would be a major clean out of all these government bureaucracies that we've got. All these heads of the bureaucracies, the heads of the TGA, the head of APRA, they'd all be gone. Straight, they'd be cleaned out. What do you call it? What's it called? Don't come Monday. Don't even bother cleaning out your desk. We'll send your stuff. We'll get some shoe boxes and put your stuff in shoe boxes. You're gone. These people need to be replaced.
So a total clean out.
Total clean out of the regulator, absolutely. Total clean out of the departments and the regulators, because that is where they've sucked up and they're just done an appalling job during this last 2 years period, where they've silenced the truth, they haven't all the evidence, and they've just basically, it's almost as though they've taken instructions from the big pharmaceutical companies.
What about, how are you going to come, these rogue state leaders?
Okay. Firstly, a little book called The Constitution. Now, the Constitution, there's a section, I think it's, I hope I got this right, I think it's 119, and that basically says if there's an inconsistency of laws between state and federal law, the federal law takes precedent. So there are many areas that the federal government can overrule the state government on. So, and where there is a conflict, you can take it to the court, and you can get the High Court to decide this. Now, the Prime Minister was going to do that originally with Western Australia, but he chickened out. He was taking McGowan to court in Western Australia over the closure of the borders, because they are a violation of our Constitution. Our Constitution is clear. The Constitution uses the words the trade, commerce and intercourse, with intercourse be the free movement of people across the states, should be, and the word's absolutely free. It's not, well, free subject to this or free subject to that. It's absolutely free. Now, the Prime Minister should have taken that case to the High Court. There is no reason why these state borders should have continued to be closed down. But the Prime Minister effectively chickened out because he thought it might have been short-term politically unpopular to take the state premiers on, when the state premiers were being shown as popular for having these lockdowns, which we now know has caused so much damage.
There's a big mess to clean up.
Oh, absolutely. Look, there is a big mess. This is why, I, as I've said, vote your sitting member out, have a complete clean out of the federal people, put new people in there, and if they don't do the job that they said they were going to do, you vote them out at the next election.
I suppose everyone's highly confused, in a state of confusion, anxiety, and we're not seeing things clearly, and we're not seeing the true threats of democracy, which is at play here. What is the major threat if we don't realise our mistakes to our country? What will happen if this continues?
Yeah.
And
there's a great speech that Ronald Reagan once gave, and freedom is not passed on through our DNA. Freedom is something that every generation has to fight for, to hand on to the next generation. And unless you fight for it and protect it, you'll live in a country where children will never know what freedom is. And that's what we have to do. We've got the idea that, we've been very fortunate in Australia. We just take our democracy and our freedoms as the natural state of affairs. So that's why you find at these rallies, you'll find so many people from Eastern European countries, the Middle East, and from China, because they've got first-hand experience, either themselves, their parents or their grandparents, telling them first-hand what it's like to live in a country where you don't have freedom and you have to respect it. And that's why these people have come to Australia, because of the freedoms that we have now. We just can't sit back and say, oh, it's okay, the freedoms that we've got will always be there, because if you look through the entire scope of human history, it's only been a wafer thin period of human history where people have lived in freedom. We've enjoyed it all our lives. You've got to stick up for it and you've got to fight for it, otherwise it'll vanish. That's why our democracy is important. We just cannot take it for granted.
will eventually things get to the point, if this continues, this communist style fascism, it's a hybrid.
It's a totalitarianism. It's where you've got central government. There's a central authority that has control over what you can say, what you can do, where and how you can work.
Will they eventually come for people's properties? What's going to happen if we continue down this slippery slope?
Well, look, anything can happen. You've seen the idea that we're just always going to be this free and democratic nation will only stay that way if people stand up and fight when freedom is challenged. As I said, freedom is not the natural order of man. The natural order of man is serfdom and feudalism. That's the natural order of how things are. And things will drift to that stage unless people stand up and fight for freedom. And when they see their freedoms being eroded, you say, no, that's not going to happen on my watch.
So we've got, if it's what you're saying is there's a concentration of power, that's like a giant compared to the everyday Australian. What can the everyday Australian that's just waking up, seeing their freedom slip away, they're not sure what to do next? What do you advise?
Well, okay, firstly, don't vote for the major parties at the next election. Learn how the preference system works, right? There's a lot of misinformation about the preference system. Learn how you can maximise your vote. Learn how you need to number every square in the lower house, what the lower house is, what the Senate is. Learn a bit about your political system and make sure at this next election, I'd love you all to vote for the United Australia Party. If you don't, if you want to go vote for the Liberal Democrats or some of the other parties or One Nation or whoever, that's for some of the what I call the freedom parties, vote for them at preferences. Just make sure you learn how the preferential system works, and you've got to send a message to the two major parties that they have let you down and they have let the nation down, and you're not going to cop it.
All right, so the public will be holding you accountable to all your promises.
That's right, and so they should.
Yeah.
And that's why we have elections every 3 years. So that's why at this election coming up, this federal election coming up, the two major parties have failed us. So you've got to show you, if you go back and you vote for them again, you deserve to get another whack. This is why you show 3 years election comes up, if the government doesn't do what it said it was going to do and has let you down, you vote them out. And we've seen both major political parties not stand up for freedom, allow our nation's reputation to be trashed, run up $1 trillion worth of debt, over $1 trillion worth of debt. They've forfeited their right. To your vote at the next election.
Craig, I just want to end with what this person wrote. Just a little bit in this note. They've got, I had no value to society, no friends, no job, because my brain is such a write-off, no value whatsoever. What are we going to do about someone who's feeling that right now? What can you promise them to have a future in this country?
Okay. Firstly, if you're feeling like that, come to one of these rallies. Right? Come to a rally where you'll see thousands of people like you that will be friendly, peaceful, and will hug you and respect you as an individual and will feel exactly like you are. Right? I've had people come to these rallies and break in tears.
Yeah. So have I. A lot. This is not what the news is portraying these people to be. They're not.
They portray us all as we're all these right-wing extremists. You know? These are rallies of love and peace, and they just go and look at the cross-section of the Australian community here, from our Indigenous brothers and sisters, from people from all backgrounds, all walks of life, all age groups, young and old, people of all nationalities and all descriptions. Come to one of these rallies if you're feeling like that, and experience that people are just like you, and you're not alone. Not alone. The other message that I give to these people is that we're winning. We're winning. The tide is turning. The tide is turning. There have been some very dark times that we've been through. There's been times I've sat there myself and thought, we're done. But I can now see the tide is turning. People are waking up. We're going to win this. Freedom is going to win, and we're going to restore opportunities. If you give that freedom back, that's where you restore the opportunities. You not only help people's mental health, but you get the economy going as well. You get the economy going, you create jobs, you create wealth, you create prosperity. It becomes a virtuous circle upwards.
Thank you for your time. Dominique, you'd like to ask some questions?
Yep.